poor girl with the same birthmark as the billionaire approaches and asks, "Are you my dad?" He freezes. Ethan Rowe adjusted the knot of his Italian tie as he walked along the marble pavement leading to the headquarters of Rowe Enterprises. People automatically moved out of his way, not out of fear, but out of instinct. There was something in his posture, in the way he carried his shoulders, that screamed power without needing words. At 32, Ethan had built an empire that started with a simple idea and 500 borrowed dollars. Now, his companies moved billions around the world. He had no time for sentimentality or relationships that didn't bring a financial return. Mr. Rowe, and the meeting with the Japanese has been rescheduled for 3, informed Marcus, his personal assistant, rushing to keep up with Ethan's long strides. Perfect. And the merger report? On your desk in 5 minutes. Ethan nodded without looking at Marcus. He was almost at the building's entrance when something small and colorful appeared in his peripheral vision. A little girl. She was standing right in front of the revolving door, as if she knew exactly where he would pass. Blonde hair fell in curls over her small shoulders, and her blue eyes shone with a determination that didn't match her apparent 6 years of age. "Excuse me," Ethan said, trying to walk past her. The girl took a step to the left, blocking his path again. "Are you Ethan Rowe?" she asked, her clear voice cutting through the morning traffic noise. Ethan stopped. No one just approached him like that. There were security guards, assistants, an invisible but effective barrier that kept strangers at a distance. How had a child managed to get so close? "Who's asking?" he replied, looking around for the girl's parents. "My name is Leah Thompson." Ethan didn't know any Thompsons. He made a discreet signal to Marcus, who immediately took out his phone, probably calling security. "Where are your parents, Leah?" The girl ignored the question. Instead, she raised her right hand and pulled up the sleeve of her pink t-shirt, exposing her wrist. Ethan stopped breathing. His feet felt rooted to the ground as if they had grown into the pavement. The noise around him, cars, people, even Marcus's voice on the phone, completely disappeared. The entire world shrank to that small wrist and the mark it carried. A small but unmistakable birthmark, crescent moon-shaped, the color of light coffee. Exactly like the one he had in the same spot, hidden under the cuff of his dress shirt. Ethan felt as if someone had pulled the floor out from under his feet. His breath caught in his throat, and he had to lean discreetly against the building's wall to keep from stumbling. "I have one just like it, don't you?" Leah said, watching his reaction with eyes that were far too curious for a child. The words came out of Ethan's mouth as a hoarse whisper. "How do you know that?" "Because you're my dad." The world didn't just stop. It simply ceased to exist. Ethan stared at the girl, his business mind desperately trying to find a logical explanation. Their coincidence. It had to be a coincidence. Birthmarks weren't genetic, they were. But while his rational mind struggled to deny it, something deeper, more primitive, recognized the truth standing right in front of him. "That's ridiculous," he finally managed to say, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "I don't have any children." "Yes, you do." "Me? You're confusing me with someone else, kid. I've never—" "Your birthmark is right here," Leah interrupted, touching her own wrist. "And you have a tiny scar on your chin from when you fell off your bike at 7 years old." Ethan involuntarily brought a hand to his chin, where there was indeed a nearly invisible scar. A story he had never told anyone. His hand trembled slightly as he touched the mark. "How?" "My mom has a picture of you, an old one, from when you were friends." The word friends came out with a hesitation that revealed Leah knew exactly what kind of friendship had existed between her mother and Ethan. Marcus approached discreetly, whispering in Ethan's ear, "Security is on the way. Do you want me to call the police?" Ethan shook his head slowly, as if coming out of a trance. His leg still didn't feel completely steady. "What's your mother's name?" "Sarah Thompson." The name hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. Sarah Mitchell. She had changed her last name, but he remembered her perfectly. Blonde hair, blue eyes, a smile that could disarm his most carefully constructed defenses. 7 years ago. They had met at a business conference in Chicago. Sarah worked for the events organization, and there was something about her that caught his attention immediately. It wasn't just her beauty. Ethan met beautiful women every day. It was her intelligence, the way she talked about business as if she truly understood it. They spent 3 weeks together. 3 weeks where Ethan almost forgot who he was, almost allowed himself to believe he could have a different life. Until reality hit. He had a company to run, deals to close, an empire to expand, so he simply disappeared. "Where is she?" Ethan asked, his voice more controlled now. "At the coffee shop on the corner. She said she didn't want to come, but I insisted." Ethan looked in the direction Leah was pointing. Across the street, through the glass of the small cafe, he could see a familiar silhouette. Sarah was sitting by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup, looking in their direction. Even from a distance, Ethan could feel the tension in her body. "She didn't want you to meet me," Leah continued. "She said you were a very busy person, that you didn't have time for kids. Your mother is right, but you came to talk to me anyway." Ethan realized it was true. He could have had Marcus handle the situation. He could have called security. He could have simply entered the building and ignored the girl. But there he was, standing on the sidewalk, still reeling from the shock of the birthmark. "Let's go to the coffee shop," he said, surprising himself with his own words. Leah smiled for the first time since she had appeared. It was a smile that lit up her whole face, transforming her from a serious, determined child into a 6-year-old girl who had just gotten what she wanted. "Marcus, cancel my morning appointments," Ethan ordered. "Sir, the meeting with the Japanese. Cancel it." They crossed the street in silence. Leah walked beside him with small but determined steps, and Ethan found himself slowing his pace to match hers. Every few feet, he glanced discreetly at the girl's wrist, still trying to process what he had seen. The cafe was a small, cozy place, with worn wooden tables and the smell of fresh bread in the air. Sarah was exactly where Ethan had spotted her, but when they approached, she didn't look up. "Hi, Mommy," Leah said cheerfully, sliding into the chair next to Sarah. Sarah finally looked up, and Ethan felt as if he had gone back 7 years in time. She was more mature, with a few fine lines around her eyes, but she was still the same woman who had managed to make him question all of his priorities. "Ethan," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "Sarah." He sat in the chair across from them, feeling strangely out of place. His hands were still trembling slightly, and he rested them on the table to hide it. "Saji has a very active imagination," Sarah said, avoiding looking directly at him. "I'm sorry if she bothered you." "I'm not imagining anything," Leah protested. "I saw the picture in your room, Mommy, the one you hide in the drawer." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her strength. "Dalsha, why don't you go order a muffin at the counter?" she said, handing her daughter a few coins. "But I want to stay here and talk to Daddy." The word Daddy echoed through the cafe. Ethan felt as if someone had just thrown ice water in his face. "Go order the muffin, Leah," Sarah repeated, her voice firmer. Leah sighed dramatically but obeyed. As soon as she walked away, Sarah finally looked directly at Ethan. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said. "The birthmark," Ethan said directly. "How did she know?" Sarah sighed. "I may have mentioned it, once or twice. And the scar on my chin. You told me the story. Remember, in the second week we spent together. You said it was the only time you cried because of a physical injury." Ethan remembered. He remembered everything from those 3 weeks with a disturbing clarity. "Why did you never contact me?" he asked. Sarah laughed. But there was no humor in the sound. "You disappeared, Ethan. Literally disappeared. One day you were there. The next day you had changed hotels and your assistant said you had returned to New York on an urgent matter. I had business to attend to." "Of course you did. You always have business to attend to." Leah returned to the table, carrying a chocolate muffin that looked bigger than her head. She sat down and began to eat, looking back and forth between Ethan and Sarah. "Is she really—" Ethan began. "Your daughter." Sarah finished the sentence. "What do you think?" Ethan looked at Leah. Now that the initial shock had passed, he could see other details. The way she furrowed her brow when she was concentrating, exactly like he did. The way she held the muffin with both hands, as if to protect it, and her eyes. Even though they were blue like her mother's, there was something in her expression, in her intensity, that was a pure reflection of him. "I want a DNA test," Ethan said, his business mind finally taking over. "Of course you do," Sarah replied, bitterness tinging her voice. "Or it's standard procedure. I understand perfectly. You don't trust me. I don't trust anyone." Leah stopped eating and looked at the two adults. "Are you guys fighting?" "No, sweetie," Sarah said quickly. "We're just talking." "You sound angry." Ethan looked at the girl and felt something strange stir in his chest. It was like looking at a miniature female version of himself. "We're not angry," he said. "We're just trying to understand some things." "What kind of things?" Sarah and Ethan exchanged glances. "Grown-up stuff," Sarah said finally. "I hate grown-up stuff," Leah muttered, turning back to her muffin. "The test can be done today," Ethan said. "I know a lab that can rush the process." "Of course you do," Sarah replied. "You know people to solve any problem, don't you?" "I can do the test," Sarah said finally. "But after that, you go back to your life and leave us alone." "Mommy," Leah protested. "It's better this way, sweetie. Mr. Rowe has very important things to do." Ethan felt the sentence like an accusation. He did have important things to do. Meetings that moved millions, decisions that affected hundreds of employees. But for some reason, none of that seemed important right now. "I'll arrange for the lab," he said, taking out his phone. While he made the calls, he watched Sarah wipe chocolate from Leah's face with a napkin. It was such a natural, loving gesture that Ethan found himself watching, fascinated. When he finished his calls, Leah was looking directly at him. "You look like the man in the picture," she said. "What picture?" "The one Mom hides." "You're smiling in it." Ethan looked at Sarah, who had blushed. "I don't hide anything," she said. "I just kept some memories." "Why?" Sarah stared at him for a long moment. "Because for 3 weeks, I thought you were real." "I am real. The Ethan I knew was real. This one is someone else." "Things change," he said. "Yes, they do. People make choices." Leah, who had been listening, suddenly stood up and walked over to Ethan. Without warning, she reached out her small hand and touched his wrist, over the cuff of his shirt. "Can I see?" she asked. Ethan hesitated. That mark was something he had kept hidden for years, but there was something in Leah's blue eyes that made him pull up his shirt sleeve. There it was, the same crescent moon-shaped mark as in the exact same place. Leah smiled and placed her wrist next to his. "They match," she said, satisfied. Ethan looked at the two marks together and felt that sense of paralysis again. It was as if the universe had conspired to create this moment, this revelation that was impossible to deny. "The lab can see us in an hour," he said. The lab was discreet and efficient. In 15 minutes, the samples were collected. Ethan had paid extra to have the results in 48 hours. "And now," Sarah asked as they left, "now we wait." And after, Ethan had no answer. His entire life had been built on certainties, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. "I don't know," he admitted. It was the first time in years that Ethan Rowe had said those words. Leah tugged on the hem of Ethan's jacket. "Are you leaving now?" she asked. "I need to get back to work." "Do you always need to get back to work?" "Yes, always." "That must be very tiring," she said. Ethan looked at the girl and realized she was right. It was exhausting, but he had never stopped to think about it. "Leah, let's go home," Sarah said. "Bye, Ethan," Leah said, waving. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, watching them walk away. When they disappeared around the corner, he finally moved. Marcus was waiting in the car, but for the first time in a long time, Ethan wasn't thinking about business. He was thinking about a crescent moon-shaped birthmark and how the world could change in a matter of seconds, 48 hours. Ethan looked at the clock on his office wall. There were exactly 43 hours and 26 minutes until the lab delivered the results. Not that he was counting, well, maybe he was. "Mr. Rowe," Marcus's voice cut through his thoughts. "The contracts from Germany have arrived for review." Ethan blinked, returning to the present. Marcus was standing at the office door, holding a thick folder with that expression of someone who had repeated the same sentence several times. "Put it on the desk," Ethan said, gesturing vaguely towards the pile of papers already occupying half of the mahogany surface. Marcus complied but didn't leave. He stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Anything else?" Ethan asked, without looking up from his computer screen. "Sir, are you all right? Since yesterday, you seem a bit what?" "Distracted." Ethan finally looked at Marcus. His assistant had been working with him for 5 years. He knew every mannerism, every behavioral pattern. If Marcus had noticed something, it was because Ethan wasn't hiding it as well as he thought. "I'm fine. Just thinking about some investments." "Of course, sir." Marcus left, but Ethan could see the doubtful expression on his face before the door closed. Investments. If only it were that simple. Ethan leaned back in his leather chair and looked out the 40th floor window. The city stretched out below him like a chessboard, small and controllable. He had always liked this view. It made him feel in command, above the mundane problems of ordinary people. Today, however, the view only reminded him of how high up he was and how far he could fall. The phone rang. Ethan answered on the first ring. "Ethan Rowe." "Mr. Rowe, this is Gene Tech Labs. Just calling to confirm that your test will be ready tomorrow at 3 p.m. as arranged." "Perfect. Would you like us to send it by email, or would you prefer to pick it up in person?" Ethan hesitated. The logical option would be to receive it by email. Faster, more efficient. But something inside him wanted to see the paper, to hold the result in his own hands. "I'll pick it up in person." "Very well. Until tomorrow, Mr. Rowe." Ethan hung up and stared back at the computer screen. The numbers on the spreadsheet seemed to dance before his eyes, making no sense. Normally, he could process financial data like other people read newspapers. Today, the information simply wouldn't penetrate his brain. He closed the laptop with more force than necessary. It was only 3 in the afternoon, but Ethan decided to go home. He told Marcus he didn't want to be disturbed and left the office without looking back. The penthouse was on the Upper East Side, occupying the top 2 floors of a building he himself had bought 3 years earlier. It was a spacious, modern place, decorated by a famous designer whose name always escaped Ethan's memory. Clean lines, neutral colors, not a single personal object in sight. Perfect for a man with no past to hide or future to plan beyond business. Ethan poured himself a whiskey and settled into the armchair facing the window. From there, he could see Central Park. He had been there a few times, mostly for business meetings at nearby restaurants. He had never really paid attention to the park itself. Now, watching the trees and paths, he could imagine children running on the grass, families having picnics, parents pushing their kids on the swings. Parents. The word echoed in his mind as if he were hearing it for the first time. Ethan had never seriously thought about having children, not because he disliked kids. He had simply never considered the possibility. His life was structured around work, company growth, and the accumulation of power and influence. Children were not part of that plan, but now, perhaps, a child was part of his reality. A daughter. Leah. Ethan closed his eyes and tried to remember everything about that morning. Her smile when she got him to go to the cafe. The way she ate the muffin, licking chocolate off her fingers. The way she said, "Bye, Ethan," when it was time to leave, as if they were old friends. She hadn't shown any fear of him, nor was she impressed by his money or status. To Leah, he was simply Ethan. When was the last time someone had seen him like that? As a person, not a business opportunity or a social conquest. The answer came immediately. Sarah. Ethan opened his eyes and took a sip of his whiskey. Sarah had been different from day one. She hadn't tried to impress him or get favors. She treated him like a normal man with normal flaws and qualities, and he had run away from her. Why? Ethan stood up and started pacing the room. It was a question he had been avoiding for 7 years, but now he could no longer escape it. Why had he left Sarah? The obvious answer was work. It was always work. But if he were honest with himself, it had been more than that. Sarah made him feel things he wasn't prepared to feel. She made him question priorities he had carefully built over the years. With Sarah, Ethan had experienced a glimpse of what a different life could be like. A life where success wasn't measured only in bank balances. A life where he could be vulnerable, where he could admit fears and uncertainties. And that had terrified him, so he fled. He went back to New York, dove headfirst into business, and built even higher walls around his heart. Now, those walls were being tested by a 6-year-old girl with blue eyes and a birthmark that mirrored his own. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Marcus. "Sorry to bother you, Mr. Rowe, but Richard Chen is on the line. He says it's urgent regarding the Singapore project." Ethan almost told Marcus to handle it himself. Almost, but old habits were hard to break. Put him through. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. When it was over, Ethan realized he had felt irritated the entire time. Normally, discussions about international expansion energized him. Today, it felt like a waste of time. Had he always felt this way? Or was it something that was changing inside him? Ethan went back to the armchair and watched the sun set over the city. The building lights began to twinkle on, creating a dotted pattern that stretched to the horizon. He had built all of this. Not literally, but his company had financed dozens of construction projects in the city. His influence could be felt on every block, in every major business decision. It was something to be proud of. It should be something to be proud of. So why did he feel so empty? The second day was worse. Ethan woke up at 5 in the morning, as usual, but instead of heading straight to the gym, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling. His mind was filled with unanswered questions, hypothetical scenarios that multiplied with each passing minute. What if Leah really was his daughter? What would that mean? Would he know how to be a father? Did he have any reference for it? His own parents had died in a car accident when he was 22. They were good people, but distant. His father traveled constantly for work, and his mother was always busy with social activities. Ethan had grown up mostly under the care of nannies and later in boarding schools. It wasn't exactly a model of a warm family, but maybe it was possible to learn. Maybe it wasn't too late to figure out how to connect with another person in a genuine way. At the office, Ethan tried to focus on work, but his mind kept wandering. During a meeting about acquisitions, he found himself wondering what it would be like to bring Leah to the office. Would she be impressed with the view, or would she find it all too serious and boring? Mr. Rowe, the voice of Patricia, the chief financial officer, brought him back to reality. "Do you have an opinion on the Phillips Corp numbers?" Ethan looked at the screen where charts and tables were projected. He had no idea what they had been discussing. "Let me analyze the data more carefully," he said. "We can resume this tomorrow." Patricia frowned but nodded. It was the second meeting Ethan had postponed in 2 days. When everyone had left, Marcus entered the office with a worried expression. "Sir, perhaps it would be best to cancel your appointments for today. You seem unwell." "I'm fine, Marcus. With all due respect, sir, you're not... Yesterday you completely forgot about the call with London. Today you barely spoke during the meeting. This isn't normal." Ethan sighed. Marcus was right. It wasn't normal, Nothing in his life had been normal since a blonde-haired girl showed up in front of his building. "I'm just dealing with some personal issues," Ethan admitted. "Personal issues?" Marcus seemed genuinely surprised. In 5 years of working together, Ethan had never mentioned personal issues. "It's temporary. It will pass." But even as he said it, Ethan wasn't sure if it was true. That night, he found himself doing something he hadn't done in years, remembering his own childhood. There were good moments, of course. Family vacations, birthdays, a few Christmas traditions his mother insisted on keeping. But most of the memories were of loneliness, of dining alone while his parents were at social engagements, of asking nannies questions he should have been asking his parents. Ethan had never resented it. It was simply the life he knew. But now, thinking about Leah, he wondered if a child should really grow up like that. And if he were her father, what kind of father would he be? Would he repeat the same patterns? Or could he be different? The question kept him awake until very late. The third day was the worst of all. Ethan could barely focus on anything. He cancelled 2 important meetings and spent most of his time staring at his phone, waiting for it to ring. At 2:30 in the afternoon, he couldn't take it anymore. He called the lab. "Gene Tech, good afternoon. This is Ethan Rowe. Will my test be ready at 3? Let me check. Yes, sir. Everything is on schedule. Can I pick it up earlier? Unfortunately, it's still being processed, but it will definitely be ready at 3. Ethan hung up and looked at the clock again. 15 minutes. Never had 15 minutes seemed so long. At 2:50, he left the office. The lab was only a 10-minute drive away, but Ethan got there in 5. He sat in the parking lot for a few minutes, trying to control his breathing. It was just a test, a piece of paper with some numbers. It shouldn't be this hard. But his hands were shaking as he entered the building. The receptionist smiled when she saw him. "Mr. Rowe, punctual as always. Dr. Harrison is waiting for you in office 3. Ethan walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. Dr. Harrison was a middle-aged man with thick-rimmed glasses and a professional smile. "Mr. Rowe, please, have a seat." Ethan sat in the chair across from the doctor's desk. There was a sealed envelope between them. "Before you open it, Doctor," Harrison said, "I'd like to explain that we ran the test twice to ensure accuracy. The results are definitive." "I understand. Would you like me to read it to you, or would you prefer to read it yourself?" "I'll read it." Dr. Harrison pushed the envelope towards Ethan. His hands trembled slightly as he tore the seal. The paper was white, with the lab's letterhead and several lines of technical text. Ethan quickly skimmed past the scientific jargon until he reached the line that mattered. Probability of paternity, 99.97%. Ethan read the line 3 times, then a 4th. The words didn't change. He was a father. Leah was his daughter. "Mr. Rowe, Doctor." Harrison's voice seemed to come from far away. "Is everything all right?" Ethan carefully folded the paper and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. "Yes? Thank you." He stood up and left the office, walking automatically to his car. He sat in the driver's seat and stayed there, motionless, for several minutes. A father. He was the father of a 6-year-old girl named Leah. The information seemed too big to fit in his head, as if his brain was too small to process the magnitude of that revelation. Ethan drove home on autopilot, barely paying attention to the traffic. He went up to the penthouse, poured himself a double whiskey and sat in his usual armchair. But this time, when he looked out the window, he saw the city with different eyes. It was no longer his personal kingdom. It was the world where his daughter was growing up, a world that suddenly seemed much more complex and dangerous. Ethan pulled the paper from his pocket and reread it. The technical words, the percentages, the numbers that confirmed what a part of him already knew from the moment he saw the birthmark. Leah was his daughter, and he had no idea what to do with that information. Ethan stood up and walked to the master bathroom. He stopped in front of the mirror and slowly pulled up his shirt sleeve. There it was, the crescent moon-shaped birthmark he had carried his whole life, that he had always seen as just an unimportant genetic quirk. Now, looking at it, Ethan could see Leah. He could imagine the girl doing the same thing, pulling up the sleeve of her pink t-shirt and comparing her mark with his. Two people connected by a mark on their skin and by DNA that didn't lie. Father and daughter. For the first time since he could remember, Ethan Rowe didn't know what his next move would be, and for the first time in his life, that didn't terrify him. In fact, for the first time in a long time, he felt truly alive. Ethan parked the car on the same street where he had first met Leah. 3 days had passed since he received the test results, 3 days in which he carried the paper in his jacket's inside pocket like a charm or a death sentence. He wasn't sure which. The small coffee shop was still there, of course. The worn wooden tables, the smell of fresh bread, the cozy atmosphere that contrasted so sharply with the world of steel and glass where he lived. Ethan pushed the door open and heard the bell jingle above his head. Sarah was sitting at the same table as before, but this time she wasn't alone. Leah was beside her, drawing in a notebook with colored pencils scattered across the table. She was wearing a yellow t-shirt today, and her blonde hair was tied in 2 loose braids. Ethan stopped at the entrance, watching the scene. There was something extraordinarily normal about it. A mother and daughter spending a quiet afternoon, unconcerned with the world around them. It was the kind of normality he had never experienced, neither as a child nor as an adult. Sarah saw him first. Their eyes met across the cafe, and he could read the silent question in her gaze. Ethan discreetly touched the pocket where the test result was. Leah looked up from her drawing and smiled when she saw him. "Ethan!" she exclaimed, waving enthusiastically. "You came back!" The joy in her voice caught him off guard. When was the last time someone had been genuinely happy to see him? Not out of self-interest, it was not out of professional obligation, but simply for being there. "Hi, Leah," he said, approaching the table. "Sit here," she said, patting the chair next to her. "I'm drawing a castle. Want to see?" Ethan sat where she indicated, aware of how stiff and calculated his movements seemed compared to her spontaneity. Sarah watched him carefully, as if waiting for him to explode or disappear again. "It's a beautiful castle," Ethan said, looking at the paper. It was truly an impressive drawing for a 6-year-old. Tall towers, colored windows, even a flag waving at the top. "Thanks." "The princess lives here," Leah explained, pointing to a window in the tallest tower where there was a small figure with yellow hair. "She's waiting for her father to come back from a very long trip." Ethan felt as if someone had punched him in the stomach. He looked at Sarah, who had averted her gaze, feigning interest in her coffee cup. "A long trip," Ethan repeated. "Yes. He left when she was a baby, but now she's grown up and he can finally come home." The girl's words echoed in the silence that followed. Ethan wondered if Sarah had told her this story, or if Leah had created this narrative on her own, a narrative that mirrored her own situation so precisely. "And what happens when he comes back?" Ethan asked, surprising himself with his own question. "They live happily ever after, of course," Leah said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The father teaches the princess how to ride a horse, and they have picnics in the castle garden." Ethan looked at the drawing again. Now he could see more details. 2 small figures in a colorful garden, one taller and one shorter, side by side. "Leah," Sarah said softly, "why don't you go order a hot chocolate? It's getting chilly outside." It was clearly an excuse to send the girl away, but Leah obeyed without complaining. As soon as she was gone, Sarah leaned forward. "You have the result," she said. "It wasn't a question. I do." "And?" Ethan took the paper out of his pocket and placed it on the table between them. Sarah picked it up and read it quickly, her face remaining carefully neutral. 99.97%, she said finally. "Ah, yes. So now you know." "Now I know." Sarah folded the paper and handed it back to him. "And what do you plan to do with this information?" It was a fair question, and Ethan realized he didn't have a complete answer. I want to get to know her better. Spend time with her. Why? The question caught him off guard. Because she's my daughter. No. Because a piece of paper says you share genetic material. That doesn't make you a father, Ethan. Sarah's words were harsh, but he could hear the maternal protection behind them. She was defending Leah from the possibility of disappointment. You're right, he admitted. I don't know how to be a father, but I want to learn. Sarah studied him for a long moment. She's grown attached to the idea of you. Since she met you, she talks about you every day. Asks when she'll see you again, if you liked her drawing, if you'll teach her how to ride a bike. She doesn't know how to ride a bike. Ethan, there's a lot you don't know about her, her favorite food, her favorite TV show, what she's afraid of in the dark. You want to be a part of her life, then you need to really get to know her. Leah returned to the table carrying a mug of hot chocolate that seemed disproportionately large in her small hands. Mom, can I show Ethan my other drawing? Of course, sweetie. Leah pulled out another sheet from the notebook. This drawing was different. 2 figures holding hands, one tall and one short, both with light-colored hair. This is me and you, she said to Ethan. We're going to the park. Ethan looked at the drawing and felt something tighten in his chest. The larger figure was smiling, a big, disproportionate smile that took up half the drawn face. It's a very nice drawing, he said, and for the first time he wasn't just being polite. He really thought it was nice. Do you want to go to the park with me? Leah asked, looking at him expectantly. Ethan looked at Sarah, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. I would like that very much. Now? Leah, Sarah intervened. Ethan might be busy. I'm not busy, Ethan said quickly. It was a lie. He had at least 3 important meetings later that day, but suddenly, none of that seemed important. The park was 2 blocks from the cafe. It was a small but well-kept space, with a playground, scattered benches, and a few trees that were already beginning to change color with the approach of autumn. Leah ran ahead, excitedly pointing to each piece of equipment. That's my favorite swing, and the slide is super fast. Sometimes I go down on my stomach, but Mom doesn't like it. Ethan walked beside Sarah, watching the girl's every move. Now that he knew for sure she was his daughter, he could see resemblances that had gone unnoticed before. The way she furrowed her brow when she was concentrating, the way she gestured as she spoke, even her posture, upright and confident, mirrored his own. Ethan, will you push me on the swing? Leah asked, already positioning herself on the seat. Of course. Ethan stood behind the swing but hesitated. How hard should he push? What if she fell? What if she got hurt? You can push harder, Leah said, laughing. I won't break. He gradually increased the force, and soon Leah was flying back and forth, her hair whipping in the wind, laughing in a way that made Ethan smile involuntarily. Higher, she shouted. Leah, be careful, Sarah said from the bench where she was sitting. It's okay, Mom, Ethan's taking care of me. The confidence in her voice surprised Ethan. Leah barely knew him, but she already placed absolute faith in him. It was both touching and terrifying. After a few minutes, Leah jumped off the moving swing, landing nimbly in the sand. Now let's go on the slide. She ran to the equipment and quickly climbed the ladder. At the top, she turned to Ethan. Stay down there to catch me. Leah, you don't need anyone to catch you, Sarah said. You already know how to go down by yourself. I know, but I want Ethan to catch me. Ethan positioned himself at the end of the slide, extending his arms. Leah came down at full speed, laughing loudly, and he caught her gently before her feet touched the ground. For a moment, she was in his arms, and Ethan felt the small, warm weight of her body, smelled the baby shampoo in her hair, saw up close the blue eyes that were so much like Sarah's, but carried an intensity that was all her own. Again, Leah exclaimed, and Ethan put her down so she could climb up again. They repeated the game several times. With each descent, Ethan felt a little less stiff, a little more natural, Leah had a gift for making everything seem simple and spontaneous. "Now I want to play hide and seek," she announced, after getting tired of the slide. "Leah, maybe Ethan doesn't—" "I'd like to play," Ethan interrupted, surprising both Sarah and himself. "Really?" Leah's eyes lit up. "Really? You count to 10 and I'll hide." Ethan turned to the nearest tree and started counting, hearing Leah's hurried footsteps moving away. When he reached 10, he turned and pretended to look for her, even though he had seen perfectly where she had hidden behind a bench. "Where could Leah have gone?" he said aloud, purposefully walking in the opposite direction. He heard her muffled giggles, clearly enjoying the fact that he couldn't find her. "Maybe she went home," Ethan continued, slowly approaching the bench. "Or maybe she's here." He popped up from behind the bench, and Leah shrieked with joy and surprise. "You found me. Now it's my turn to seek." "Ethan," Sarah called. Can we talk for a minute?" Leah was already counting, so Ethan quickly hid behind a tree that was obviously too small to conceal him completely, but which Leah would pretend not to see for a few minutes. "What is it?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "You're different." "Different how?" "More relaxed, more human." Ethan didn't know how to respond to that. He did feel different, in fact, as if a part of himself that had been dormant for years was slowly waking up. "She's special," he said, watching Leah pretend to look for him in obviously wrong places. "Yes, she is, and she's starting to get attached to you. Is that a bad thing?" "It depends. Are you going to stay? Or are you going to disappear again when you decide this is too complicated?" It was a fair question, but Ethan wasn't sure of the answer. All of this was too complicated. More complicated than any deal he had ever closed. More unpredictable than any market he had ever faced. "Found you!" Leah shouted, appearing from behind the tree. "You're too big to hide there." "You're right," Ethan said, laughing. "I need to find better hiding spots. Let's play something else. Do you know how to play hopscotch?" "Hopscotch? You draw squares on the ground and hop on one foot. It's easy." Leah picked up a small branch and began to draw squares in the dirt next to the playground. Ethan watched, fascinated by her concentration, by the way her tongue stuck out slightly between her lips when she was focused. "Done. Now you try." Ethan looked at the crooked squares drawn on the ground and then at his $3,000 Italian suit. "Go on, Ethan," Leah encouraged. "It's fun." He took off his jacket and handed it to Sarah, who was watching him with an amused expression. Then he tried to hop in the squares the way Leah had demonstrated. It was a disaster. Ethan lost his balance on the second square, landed with both feet in the third square and nearly fell on the fourth. Leah laughed so hard she had to sit on the grass to keep from falling over. "You're terrible at this," she said between laughs. "I am," Ethan agreed, and found that he didn't mind one bit. "But that's okay. I'll teach you. You just need to practice." And she really did try to teach him. For 15 minutes, Leah patiently demonstrated the correct technique, corrected his posture, and encouraged every small improvement. She took her role as a teacher very seriously, and Ethan found himself genuinely trying to improve so as not to disappoint her. When he finally managed to complete the entire sequence without stepping on the lines, Leah clapped as if he had just closed the biggest deal of his life. "You did it! I knew you could do it!" The pure joy in her voice, the genuine pride in his small accomplishment, touched something deep inside Ethan. When was the last time someone had been so excited about one of his successes? When was the last time a success had felt so significant? "Thanks for teaching me," he said, and he was truly grateful. "You're welcome. Friends help each other, right?" Friends. The word echoed in Ethan's mind. Leah saw him as a friend, not a distant, intimidating figure. It was a refreshing and frightening perspective all at once. The sun was beginning to set when Sarah stood up from the bench. "Leah, we need to go home. You have school early tomorrow." "Oh, already?" Leah made a disappointed face. "Ethan, can you come have dinner with us?" The question caught both Ethan and Sarah by surprise. "Leah," Sarah began, "please, I can make my special macaroni." Ethan looked at Sarah, searching for some indication of how he should respond. She seemed torn between the desire to protect her daughter and the knowledge that Leah was genuinely having fun. "Maybe another day," Ethan said finally. "So tonight you need to rest for school. Promise you'll come another day?" "I promise." And for the first time in a long time, Ethan made a promise he truly intended to keep. As they walked back to the cafe, Leah held his hand. She didn't ask, didn't seek permission. She simply laced her small fingers with his as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Ethan looked at their joined hands, his ghoul large and calloused from years of work, and hers, small and soft, with traces of colored pencil under her nails. It was a simple image, but one that somehow represented something monumentally significant. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan Rowe was holding his daughter's hand, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking of anywhere else he'd rather be. "Do you want to see where I live?" Ethan asked, looking at Leah through the rearview mirror. They were in his car, a German sedan that cost more than most people earned in 2 years. Sarah had agreed to let Leah spend the afternoon with him, but not without giving him a list of recommendations. "Yes," Leah replied, swinging her legs on the back seat. "Is your house big?" "It's pretty big. Bigger than ours." Ethan thought of the small apartment where Sarah and Leah lived. "Yes, it's bigger." "Why?" The simple question caught him off guard. Why was his house big? Why did he need 15 rooms when it was just him? "I have space to work from home," he finally said. The penthouse was in one of the city's most exclusive neighborhoods. Ethan showed his ID to the doorman, who greeted him respectfully before letting them in. "Wow," Leah said as the elevator doors opened directly into the living room. "Your elevator comes inside your house?" "It does." "That's so cool." She stepped out of the elevator and stood in the middle of the room, slowly turning to take it all in. Ethan tried to see the space through her eyes, the high ceiling, the large windows, the modern furniture arranged with precision. "It's very clean," Leah said finally. "And I have a cleaning crew that comes 3 times a week. Where are your things?" "What things?" "Your things. Pictures, books, toys, your stuff." Ethan looked around and realized Leah was right. There was nothing personal in sight. No photos, no objects with sentimental value. "I keep my things in the bedrooms," he said, though it wasn't entirely true. Leah walked to the main window and pressed her nose against the glass. "Wow, it's so high. You can see the whole city from here." "Do you like the view?" "It's pretty. But it must be kind of lonely living so high up, right?" Her simple perspective surprised him. Lonely. He had never thought of the height as something related to loneliness. "Do I want to see the rest of the house?" he asked. "Yes." Ethan took her on a tour of the rooms. Leah politely observed each space, but he noticed that nothing seemed to really impress her. Not the gourmet kitchen, not the office with its multiple screens, not even the private movie theater. "Do you watch movies in here by yourself?" she asked. "Fat, I rarely watch movies." "Why not?" "I don't have time." "But you have a whole room just for it." Ethan had no answer to that logical observation. When they reached the terrace, Leah finally showed some real interest. "You have a pool!" she exclaimed, running to the edge. "I do." "Do you swim all the time?" "Actually, no." "Why?" "I don't know how to swim very well." Leah stared at him in disbelief. "You have a giant pool and you don't know how to swim." "I know the basics. I just don't do it often." "That's weird. If I had a pool, I'd be in it all day." She walked away from the pool and discovered the garden. There were plants carefully chosen by a professional landscaper, but Leah went straight to a corner where some wildflowers had grown. "Look at these little flowers," she said, crouching down to smell them. "They're the prettiest of all." Ethan looked at the small yellow flowers that would probably be removed by the gardener during the next maintenance. To him, They were weeds. To Leah, they were the prettiest. "Do you want to have lunch?" he asked. "I can order food from any restaurant in the city." "You don't cook?" "Not much. Mommy cooks every day. She makes the best macaroni and cheese in the world." "I can order macaroni and cheese from a very good Italian restaurant." "It's not the same," Leah said. "Mom's cooking is different." The food arrived in elegant containers from a 5-star restaurant. Ethan had ordered macaroni and cheese, but it was a gourmet creation with 3 types of imported cheese and grated truffle. Leah tried a forkful and made a face. "Is it bad?" Ethan asked. "It's not bad. It just doesn't taste like macaroni and cheese." "It has cheese. 3 different kinds, but it doesn't taste like home." Ethan ate in silence, watching Leah pick at her food without enthusiasm. He had tried to impress her with the best his money could buy, but it hadn't worked. In the walk-in closet, Leah observed rows of identical suits, dozens of ties organized by color. "Do you wear all of this?" she asked. "I wear different combinations for different occasions, but they're all the same." Ethan realized she was right. There were slight variations, but in the end, they were all basically the same outfit. "Why don't you have colorful clothes?" Leah asked. "Colorful clothes aren't appropriate for work, but you work from home sometimes. You could wear colors here." "I never thought about that." Leah returned to the main living room and turned to him. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you want to show me your house?" The question made him pause. Why had he wanted to show her his house? To impress her, to prove he was successful? "I thought you would like it," he said. "I like being with you," Leah said. "That doesn't matter where." Her words hit him with unexpected force. All afternoon he had been trying to impress her with luxury, but all she wanted was to be with him. "The park was more fun," Leah continued. "You smiled more at the park." Ethan realized she was right. At the park, he had felt more relaxed than in his own home. "Do you prefer the park?" he asked. "I prefer where you're happiest." Ethan sat on the sofa next to her, looking around his expensive house that suddenly felt cold and impersonal. "Do you know what I liked most here?" Leah said. "What?" "The little flowers in your garden. And when you laughed at your weird gourmet food." "I laughed." "You did. Just a little. But you laughed." Ethan hadn't noticed. "Leah," he said, "thank you." "For what?" "For showing me how to see things in a different way." Leah smiled and snuggled up next to him on the sofa. "Ethan, next time, can we just go to the park?" "Of course," he said, and realized he preferred that idea too. For the first time since he had bought that house, Ethan understood the difference between an expensive place and a place that truly mattered, and he realized that the place that mattered most was wherever Leah was. "Mr. Rowe," Marcus's voice sounded for the 3rd time before Ethan finally looked up from his computer screen. "What?" "The meeting with Yamamoto Industries started 15 minutes ago. They're waiting in the conference room." Ethan blinked, confused. He looked at the clock on the screen. 10:17 a.m. The meeting was scheduled for 10. "Damn," he muttered, getting up quickly. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I did, sir, 3 times. You said you were on your way." Ethan paused mid-motion of grabbing his jacket. He didn't remember Marcus saying anything about the meeting. "I said that." "You did, sir, 15 minutes ago." Ethan put on his jacket and adjusted his tie, trying to regain his professional composure. But as he walked down the hall toward the conference room, his mind wasn't on the $50 million deal he was about to discuss. He was thinking about Leah, asking why he didn't have colorful clothes. The meeting was a disaster. Ethan had prepared for weeks for this negotiation. He knew every number, every clause, every advantage Rowe Enterprises had over the competition. But sitting at the table with the Japanese executives, he found himself struggling to stay focused. "Mr. Rowe," said Mr. Tanaka, the director of Yamamoto, "you mentioned an alternative proposal for the implementation schedule." Ethan looked at him, trying to remember which proposal he had mentioned. The problem was he couldn't remember mentioning any proposal at all. Yes, the proposal, he began, buying time. Marcus, could you get the documents we discussed yesterday? Marcus looked at him with a confused expression, but nodded and left the room. In the 5 minutes Marcus was gone, Ethan desperately tried to reconstruct the thread of the conversation, but his mind kept wandering. He remembered how Leah had snuggled next to him on the sofa, how she had said she preferred where he was happiest. When Marcus returned with a random folder of documents, Ethan improvised a presentation that sounded vague even to himself. The Japanese executives left the meeting politely, but Ethan could see the disappointment in their eyes. A $50 million deal had just slipped through his fingers. "What the hell happened in there?" asked Patricia, the CFO, as soon as the visitors left. "It was just a bad day," Ethan said, loosening his tie. "A bad day? Ethan? You looked completely lost. You didn't even know what you were talking about." "I knew what I was talking about." "No, you didn't. And that's not normal. You never lose control in a meeting." Ethan headed for his office, but Patricia followed him. "What's going on?" she insisted. "In the last 2 weeks, you've cancelled 4 important meetings, forgotten the call with London, and now this. I'm just going through some adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" "Personal." Patricia stopped walking, surprised. "Personal? Since when do you have personal issues?" It was a fair question. During the 8 years Patricia had worked with him, Ethan had never mixed his personal life with work, mainly because he had no personal life to mix. "It's temporary," he said, entering his office and closing the door. But it wasn't temporary, and it was getting worse. The next afternoon, Ethan completely forgot about a video conference with European investors. Marcus had to invent an excuse about technical difficulties while trying to locate Ethan, who was at the park pushing Leah on the swing. The following day, he was 2 hours late for a board meeting because he had lost track of time teaching Leah how to tie her shoes. "This can't continue," said Richard Chen, the company's vice president, storming into Ethan's office on Friday. "The board is asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind like, is our CEO having a nervous breakdown?" "The kind like, do we need to consider a change in leadership?" Ethan leaned back in his chair, a nervous breakdown. That's how they saw his situation. "I'm fine, Richard." "No, you're not. And it's not just work. You're different, more distant, yet at the same time more, I don't even know how to describe it." "Human," Ethan suggested, remembering Sarah's comment. "Yeah, maybe that's it. But whatever it is, it's affecting the company. Clients are noticing. The team is worried." Richard sat in the chair across from Ethan's desk. "Look, we've been friends for 15 years. Can you tell me what's going on?" Ethan looked at Richard. They were friends, indeed. Or they were the closest thing Ethan had to friends. They had built the company together, spent sleepless nights closing deals, celebrating victories, and facing crises. But how could he explain that his life had been turned upside down because of a 6-year-old girl? "It's complicated," Ethan said. Complicate it for me." Ethan was silent for a long moment. Part of him wanted to keep the secret to protect his privacy as he had always done, but another part was tired of carrying this weight alone. "Have you ever thought about having kids?" he asked. Richard blinked, clearly not expecting that question. "I have 2 kids, Ethan." "You know Tommy and Sarah." "No, I mean, what's it like to know you're responsible for another person? What's it like when your life is no longer just your own? It's transformative, scary, sometimes suffocating, but it's also, I don't know, it gives a different purpose to everything." Ethan nodded slowly. "And what if you found out you had a child, but you only found out now?" Richard frowned. "Hypothetically." "Hypothetically? Well, it would be a shock, I imagine. It would change everything. It would be—" Richard stopped mid-sentence, studying Ethan's face. "Ethan, this isn't hypothetical, is it?" Ethan took a deep breath. "It's not hypothetical. You have a child, A daughter. My God. Richard leaned back in his chair. How long have you known? 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And you didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. How old is she? 6. Richard ran a hand through his hair. Jesus, Ethan. A 6-year-old daughter. And the mother. It's complicated. All right, it can be complicated. But now I understand. Now it makes sense. What makes sense? Your distraction. Your change in priorities. Man, you found out you're a father. It's normal for your head to be a mess. Ethan felt strangely relieved to have told someone, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. The board won't understand, he said. The board will have to understand. You built this company from scratch. You have the right to a personal life. But the business will survive. You need time to adapt to this new reality. Ethan looked out his office window. Down below, the city bustled with its usual routine. People coming and going, focused on their goals and their ambitions, their material achievements. But Ethan was beginning to understand that maybe there were other important things besides material achievements. What do I do, Richard? He asked. You learn to be a father, and you learn to balance that with being a CEO. It's not easy, but it's possible. What if I can't? What if I'm terrible at it? Every new dad thinks he's going to be terrible. It's part of the process. Richard stood up. But first, you need to focus a bit on work too. The company needs you to be present, at least for the important meetings. You're right. And Ethan? Richard paused at the door. Congratulations. I know it's complicated, but congratulations. When Richard left, Ethan was alone in the office. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he had already memorized. Sarah? It's Ethan. I was wondering if Leah would like to have dinner with me tonight. I thought maybe we could order pizza. On the other end of the line, he heard Sarah smile. She would love that. And Sarah, you're invited too. Ethan, please, I think it's time we start figuring out how this is going to work. There was a long pause before Sarah answered, all right, but no fancy restaurants. Leah wants real pizza, not gourmet pizza. Real pizza, Ethan repeated, smiling. Understood. For the first time in weeks, Ethan hung up the phone feeling good about a decision he had made. Some things were more important than business, and he was finally ready to find out what they were. The pizza arrived in 15 minutes, still hot from the box, with that irresistible smell of melted cheese and baked dough. Ethan had chosen Sarah's apartment as the dinner location, instinctively understanding that Leah would feel more comfortable at home. Ethan! Leah ran to the door as soon as he rang the bell, opening it before Sarah even got there. You brought pizza? I did. 2 pizzas, 1 cheese and 1 pepperoni. My favorite is cheese, Leah said, jumping with joy. Sarah appeared behind her daughter, drying her hands on a dish towel. The apartment was small but cozy, with furniture that had seen better days, but was clearly cared for with love. There were Leah's drawings on the fridge, books stacked on the shelves, and a sense that life was truly being lived there. Hi, Sarah said, a bit formal. Hi. Thanks for accepting the invitation. Leah has been excited all week. They settled at the small kitchen table, Leah chattering excitedly about her week at school as she distributed slices of pizza onto colorful, mismatched plates. On Tuesday, the teacher talked about families, Leah recounted. Everyone had to draw their family. I drew me, Mommy and you. Sarah nearly choked on her soda. Leah, what? It's my family now, right? Leah said innocently, taking a bite of her pizza. The teacher said families can be different sizes. Ethan felt the weight of Sarah's gaze on him. There was something between challenge and protection in that look, as if she were saying, see, she's already attached. Don't disappoint her. And what else did you learn in school? Ethan asked, changing the subject. I learned that dinosaurs lived a long, long time ago. Before cars, before houses, before everything. Did you know that? I did. Do you like dinosaurs? I do. My favorite is the Tyrannosaurus Rex because he was the king of the dinosaurs. But the teacher said he was pretty mean. Not all of them were mean, Ethan said. Some only ate plants. Really? Like which ones? And so, Ethan found himself explaining different types of dinosaurs to a 6-year-old girl while they ate pizza on mismatched plates. It was surreal. 6 months ago, he was closing international deals. Now he was talking about brachiosauruses, and strangely, he was enjoying it. After dinner, Leah insisted on showing Ethan her room. It was small, but every inch had been used creatively. There was a bed with a makeshift canopy made of colorful sheets, low shelves filled with books, and a small table covered in colored pencils and papers. "Look," Leah said, grabbing a notebook. "I made more drawings of you." Ethan flipped through the notebook and was surprised. There were at least a dozen drawings of him. In some, he was in a suit. In others, casual. In one, he was pushing her on the swing. In another, they were both eating pizza. "You draw very well," he said, genuinely impressed. "Thanks. Mommy says I inherited her artistic talent." "Your mum draws." "She does. She's really good. Want to see?" Before Ethan could answer, Leah ran out of the room. He followed her back to the living room, where Sarah was clearing the pizza plates. "Mom, show Ethan your drawings," Leah said. "Leah, Ethan doesn't need to see." "I'd like to see," Ethan said. Sarah hesitated, but Leah was already pulling a portfolio from under the sofa. "Look," Leah said, opening the portfolio. "Mommy draws people, places, everything." Ethan leaned in to see and was genuinely surprised. The drawings were excellent. Detailed portraits, urban landscapes, studies of light and shadow. There was real talent there. "These are very good," he said to Sarah. "Did you study art?" "A little, in college." "She wanted to be an artist," Leah said proudly. "But then I was born and she had to get another job." Sarah blushed and quickly closed the portfolio. "Leah, that's enough. Go brush your teeth. But it's still early. Go." When Leah left, an awkward silence settled between them. "Did you give up art because of her?" Ethan asked. "I didn't give it up. I just postponed it. Art doesn't pay the bills." "What if it did?" "What do you mean?" "What if you could go back to drawing? If you didn't have to worry about money?" Sarah stared at him with a hard expression. "Stop right there." "Stop where?" "With this conversation, I don't need your charity, Ethan." "It's not charity. It's what? Guilt. You want to feel better about disappearing for 6 years. 7 years. And it's not guilt. Then what is it?" Ethan didn't know how to answer. It wasn't guilt, exactly. It was something more complex. It was a desire to fix what had been lost, to build something that should have existed from the beginning. "I want to be present now," he said finally. "For how long?" "What do you mean? For how long do you want to be present?" "Until the novelty wears off, until work gets more interesting, until some other woman comes into your life." "Sarah?" "No?" She stood up and started pacing the room. "You don't get it. She's already attached to you. She draws you every day, tells her friends about you, asks when she'll see you again. What if you decide this is too complicated and disappear again?" "I'm not going to disappear. How can I be sure of that?" It was a fair question, and Ethan realized he didn't have a convincing answer. How could he promise something he himself didn't know if he could fulfill? "You can't," he admitted, "but I can try to prove it." "How?" "By being here, by showing up, by being consistent." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "You know, being a father isn't just showing up for dinner and going to the park, right? It's waking up in the middle of the night when she's sick. It's going to school meetings. It's having patience when she throws a tantrum. It's—" I know nothing about being a father," Ethan interrupted. "So but I want to learn." "Why?" "Because—" He hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because when I'm with her, I feel like a better person." Sarah stopped pacing and looked at him intently. "That's not a good enough reason, Ethan. You can't use a child to feel better about yourself. That's not it. It's more... She makes me want to be a better person. Leah returned to the living room in her pajamas, her hair still damp from brushing. Ethan, can you tuck me in? She asked. Ethan looked at Sarah, who nodded reluctantly. Of course. Leah's room was bathed in soft shadows, illuminated only by a moon-shaped nightlight. She settled into bed and pulled the covers up to her chin. Ethan, she said, her voice sleepy. Yes. Are you coming again tomorrow? Not tomorrow, but I'll be back soon. Promise. I promise. Ethan, yes, I like you. The simple, honest words hit Ethan in the chest like a punch. Not I love you or grand declarations. Just I like you, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I like you too, Leah. Good night. Good night. Ethan left the room and found Sarah in the kitchen, washing the dishes. She'll be devastated if you disappear, Sarah said, without turning around. I won't disappear. You disappeared before. That was different. I didn't know about her. And now that you know, can you handle the responsibility? Ethan leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Sarah wash the dishes with mechanical, precise movements. I don't know, he admitted. I'm afraid I can't. I'm afraid of being a terrible father like mine was. Sarah stopped washing and looked at him. How was your father terrible? Not terrible, just absent. Always working, always traveling. When he was home, he didn't know how to talk to me. And you're afraid of repeating that. I am. My whole life has been about work. I don't know how to be present, how to be affectionate. Being affectionate isn't something you learn from books, Ethan. It's something you feel. What if I don't feel it? You already do. Sarah turned completely to face him. I've seen the way you look at her, how your face changes when she smiles. You already feel it. Ethan fell silent, processing Sarah's words. Then why am I so scared? Because she matters to you. And when someone matters, there's a possibility of being disappointed, of disappointing them. What if I repeat my father's mistakes? Then you learn and do things differently. Ethan, the difference between you and your father is that you're here having this conversation, questioning these things. Did your father question them? No. He just lived as if family was a detail of life, not the center of it. So you're already being different. Ethan looked toward the hallway where Leah's room was. She's so pure. There's no malice, no ulterior motives. She just wants to be with me. That's how children love, unconditionally. And what if I don't deserve that? No one deserves a child's love, Ethan. It's a gift. The question is, what are you going to do with that gift? Ethan pushed himself away from the counter and walked to the living room window. Outside, the city continued its nightly routine, but something had changed in his perspective. I want to be present, he said. I want to be here when she needs me. I want to meet her friends. I want to help with her homework. I want to be a real dad. That will require changes in your life. I know. Big changes, not just on weekends or when it's convenient. I know. Sarah walked over to him. And what if it's too hard? What if you realize you can't balance everything? Ethan turned to face her. Then I'll find a way. Because looking at her, Sarah, looking at Leah, I realize I can't run away anymore. I can't pretend she doesn't exist or that this doesn't matter. Why? Because she looks at me as if I'm capable of being better than I am. And maybe it's time to try to live up to that expectation. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. All right, she said finally. We'll try, but slowly. And if you change your mind, I won't. If you change your mind, she repeated firmly, be honest. Don't just disappear. She deserves an explanation. Understood. Sarah nodded and went back to the kitchen. And Ethan, she said without turning around, thank you for wanting to try. Ethan left the apartment that night with a strange feeling in his chest. It was fear mixed with hope, anxiety mixed with determination. For the first time in his life, He had something more important than work to focus on, and for the first time, that didn't completely terrify him. Ethan stood in front of the executive bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie for the 5th time in 10 minutes. His hands were trembling slightly, something that hadn't happened in years, not even during the most tense negotiations. Outside, he could hear the murmur of journalists settling into the Rowe Enterprises conference room. Marcus had called the press for an important statement from the CEO, but not even he knew exactly what Ethan planned to announce. It was a decision Ethan had made alone in the middle of the night, after spending hours looking at a picture Leah had drawn of him. "Mr. Rowe," Marcus's voice echoed through the door. "They're all ready. We have representatives from 15 different outlets. I'll be right there." Ethan looked at his reflection one last time. For 32 years, that man in the mirror had built his life on absolute control, an impeccable image, and strategic power. Today he was about to tear it all down with a few simple words. His phone vibrated. A text from Sarah. "Leah asked if you're picking her up from school today." I said yes. Ethan smiled for the first time that day. It was exactly the reminder he needed. The conference room was more crowded than he expected. Business journalists, celebrity reporters, photographers, even some bloggers. Everyone curious about what the notoriously reclusive billionaire Ethan Rowe had to say that would justify a press conference with no notice. Ethan stood behind the podium, looking at the dozens of expectant faces. TV cameras were broadcasting live. Flashes were already starting to go off. There was no turning back. In a few minutes, his private life would become public knowledge. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice echoing through the microphones. "I've called you here today to share something personal that will fundamentally affect how I conduct my life and my business." The journalist leaned forward, pens ready, recorders on. 3 months ago, I discovered that I have a daughter." Ethan paused deliberately, letting the information sink into the instantly silent room. "Her name is Leah. She is 6 years old, and she is the most important thing that has ever happened in my life." The silence in the room was broken by a coordinated burst of flashes and a growing murmur that quickly turned into overlapping voices. "I know many of you will have questions about the circumstances, about the child's mother, about why I'm revealing this now. The truth is simple. I've discovered that being a father has completely changed my perspective on what truly matters in life." A journalist in the front row raised her hand energetically. "Mr. Rowe, will this affect your position as CEO of Rowe Enterprises?" "It will affect my position in life," Ethan replied, looking directly at the camera. "For the first time in my career, I have something more important than quarterly reports. I have someone who depends on me not just as a CEO, but as a father, and that responsibility comes first." "How will this impact the shareholders?" shouted another journalist. "The shareholders hired a competent CEO and they will continue to have one. But now he is a CEO who is also a father. I will be present in my daughter's life. I will be at school recitals, parent-teacher conferences, birthdays, and if that means missing a few business meetings, so be it." The buzz grew significantly. Ethan could see the headlines forming. "Billionaire reveals secret daughter. CEO puts fatherhood above profits." "Mr. Rhodey," said a veteran reporter, "you have a well-documented history of discreet relationships and of keeping your personal life strictly separate from business. Doesn't this revelation contradict your life philosophy?" "It absolutely contradicts it," Ethan admitted without hesitation, "and I am completely fine with that contradiction. I spent years thinking that success meant controlling every piece of information about my life, building walls between public and private. I now realize that real success is having people who genuinely matter to you, and my daughter matters more than any deal I could ever close." The questions continued for another 20 minutes. Questions about child support, about the child's mother, about the impact on the company. Ethan answered with an honesty that surprised even himself. When he finally ended the press conference, as the journalists filed out of the room in excited groups, he felt a mix of deep relief and absolute terror. There was no going back. In a few hours, his private life would be a headline in every newspaper in the country. Marcus approached with a worried expression. "Sir, perhaps we should have prepared a more elaborate communication strategy." "No, Marcus, I'm tired of elaborate strategies. I'm tired of controlling every word, every gesture. I'm tired of lying by omission to protect an image that doesn't make me happy." Ethan's phone rang insistently. It was Richard, probably watching the broadcast. "Ethan, what the hell did you just do?" "What I needed to do a long time ago. You know this is going to cause a monumental scandal, right? The shareholders are going to question your leadership ability." "Richard, answer me something. Do you have children?" "You know perfectly well I have two." "And have you ever regretted having them?" "Of course not, but this is completely different." "It's not different. Understand that I can no longer pretend Leah doesn't exist. I can no longer hide the most important part of my life for the sake of business strategies." Richard sighed deeply on the other end of the line. "All right, Ethan, we'll deal with the consequences, but I hope you know what you're doing." "For the first time in a long time, I know exactly what I'm doing." Ethan left the office and drove straight to Leah's school. It was the first time he was picking her up personally, and as he parked in front of the Simple building, he wondered how many minutes it would take for a journalist to find out where she studied. Leah came running out when she saw him standing at the gate, her pink backpack bouncing on her back. "Ethan, you came to pick me up, for real?" "I sure did." "How was school today?" "It was great. The teacher read a story about a nice dragon who helped people, and in PE we played dodgeball and my team won." While driving to Sarah's apartment, Ethan listened to Leah chatter excitedly about her day. Nothing about newspaper headlines, nothing about corporate scandals. Just a 6-year-old girl talking about nice dragons and winning games. Sarah was waiting at the building's entrance when they arrived, her arms crossed. "I saw it on the news," she said, as soon as Ethan got out of the car. And I honestly don't know if that was the bravest or the most reckless thing you've ever done. It was probably both at the same time. Leah ran to hug her mother enthusiastically. "Mom, Ethan picked me up from school, just like the other dads, and we're having dinner together again." "Yes, sweetie." "We are." During the simple dinner of homemade macaroni and cheese, Ethan's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls from journalists, aides, other CEOs, even distant relatives. He turned the device off completely. "Aren't you going to answer any of those?" Sarah asked. "No, I'm having dinner with my daughter." "The rest can wait." Sarah looked at him with an expression that seemed to contain surprise and admiration. After Leah went to her room to do her homework, Sarah poured fresh coffee for them both. "You do realize this is going to change absolutely everything in your life, right?" she said, stirring her sugar slowly. "I know that perfectly well. Journalists will want to talk to me. They'll dig into our full story. They'll try to turn our lives into a soap opera, a media circus. I'll protect both of you from anything like that. I have the resources for it." "How exactly?" "With whatever it takes. Specialized lawyers, discreet security, moving to another city if necessary." Sarah shook her head firmly. "I don't want Leah to grow up surrounded by security guards and lawyers. She deserves a normal childhood." "Then we'll do it differently. We'll find a way that works for her, but Sarah, I just couldn't hide her existence anymore. I couldn't keep pretending the most important part of my life didn't exist publicly." "Why? What really changed?" Ethan was silent for a moment, searching for the exact words. "Yesterday, when I was in the office discussing a $200 million merger with executives from Japan, all I could think about was whether Leah had remembered to bring her jacket to school. I realized that it didn't matter how many billions I moved. If I lost her smile when she sees me coming, I would have lost everything of real value." Sarah studied him intently. "And what if this decision costs you your company? What if the shareholders really decide you no longer fit the profile?" "Honestly, it won't, but if it did, I would choose her without a second of hesitation. Really, you'd give up everything you've built." "Sarah, for 32 years, I methodically built a life based on absolute control. And in the last 3 months, a 6-year-old girl has shown me that I was completely wasting my entire life. Leah appeared in the kitchen in striped pajamas, dragging her bare feet. I finished my math homework. Ethan, can you tuck me in tonight? Of course I can. In the bedroom, as he carefully arranged Leah's blanket, Ethan noticed she had taped one of her drawings of him to the wall beside her bed. You put my drawing up there? He asked, touched. I did. This way I can see you before I go to sleep and when I wake up in the morning. Do you like it? Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. I like it very much. Leah, can I ask you something important? Of course. Do you really like having a dad, even with all the complications? I like it a lot. Before, I'd see my friends at school with their dads picking them up, helping with homework, and I'd get sad. Now I have you too. What if some people start talking about us on TV, if our picture is in the newspaper? Leah frowned, thoughtful. Why would they want to talk about us? Because I'm kind of famous in the business world, and sometimes famous people are in the newspaper on TV, like a soap opera star. Sort of, but for different reasons. Cool. I'm going to tell all my friends my dad is famous. Ethan chuckled softly. Her simplicity always surprised him. Leah, even if things get really complicated, even if a lot of people talk about us, even if everything changes, I want you to know one very important thing. What? Ethan knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to the exact level of her blue eyes. I will never leave you again. Never. No matter what happens in the world, I will always be here for you. Promise for real. I promise for real. It's the most serious promise I've ever made in my life. Leah smiled with that pure smile that always melted all his defenses and hugged his neck tightly. I love you, Dad. It was the first time she had specifically called him Dad. Ethan felt involuntary tears in his eyes and hugged her back with all the affection he was learning to express. I love you too, my daughter, more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. When he left the room, Sarah was in the living room watching the evening news. On the screen was his photo from the press conference with the headline, Billionaire Reveals Secret Daughter and Puts Family Above Business. How does it feel to be a national headline? Sarah asked. Strangely relieved. For the first time in years, I feel genuinely relieved. Sarah turned off the TV and turned to him. Ethan. Yes, thank you. From the bottom of my heart. For what? For choosing her, for choosing us, for having the courage to change. It wasn't a difficult choice, Sarah. In fact, it was the easiest choice I've ever made in my entire life. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since they had reconnected, it was a smile completely without reservations. So, what do we do now? How does all of this work? She asked. Now we try to be a family, a strange, unconventional family, but a real family. You know it's not going to be easy, right? The press, work, learning to live together, creating routines. I know it will be complicated, but look. Ethan gestured towards the room where Leah was sleeping. She's worth every difficulty that might come our way. Sarah nodded with conviction. She really is. That night, Ethan left Sarah's apartment with a feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time, deep and true peace. Yes, there would be inevitable consequences. Yes, it would be difficult to navigate the exposure. But for the first time in his life, he had consciously chosen love over strategy, family over power. And for the first time in decades, he felt like he was truly living, not just existing. 6 months later, the headlines had dwindled to occasional articles. The company had not only survived the initial scandal, but many clients and investors admired his honesty. Ethan had learned the delicate balance between work and fatherhood, was present at all of Leah's school meetings, and had mastered the art of making her famous macaroni and cheese. Sarah had gone back to drawing seriously, selling several pieces to local galleries, and planning her first exhibition. Leah remained exactly Leah, Pure, funny, curious, and the best gift Ethan could have ever received from the universe. It wasn't the perfect family you see in home decor magazines. It was infinitely better than that. It was a real, authentic, and true family.